The kitchen, late at night. The clock ticks, each beat pounding like a countdown in my chest. I plug the USB into the laptop, the screen flares to life, revealing what I've buried for weeks. The door creaks open. Lisa steps in, hair damp with sweat from the gym, a water bottle in her hand as if this were just another ordinary night. But nothing feels ordinary to me anymore. I pull out a chair, my voice rough but steady. Sit down. Watch this. The cold blue light spills across her face as the footage plays. Lisa, hand in hand with Tyler, walking into a hotel. Her breath catches, fingers whitening as they crush the bottle in her grip. I don't scream. I don't curse. I just hold her gaze. Because I know if she admits it, this marriage ends instantly. But if she denies it, then I'm the one who loses everything. Morning light spilled through the blinds, soft and steady, the way it had for 20 years. My life had always been built on order. I woke at 6, brewed the same black coffee, checked the same financial reports before work. Our home was predictable, comfortable, almost like clockwork. Ethan grumbled his way down the stairs, Grace hummed while buttering her toast, and Lisa moved about the kitchen in her robe, hair tied loosely, laughing at my old recycled jokes. It was the rhythm of an American household that I thought would never falter. We ate dinners together, planned vacations we rarely took, saved for college, and played our roles like a script we all agreed to follow. I used to take pride in that, believing that routine was the secret to stability, to marriage, to fatherhood. But routines can crack. They don't shatter all at once. They slip, one habit at a time, until you wake up and realize the woman across the table isn't laughing anymore. Everything began to change the day Lisa found the gym. She stood in the living room one Saturday morning, her eyes alive with a fire I hadn't seen in years. In her hands was a glossy brochure for some fitness transformation program. Pictures of sculpted bodies, smiling testimonials, promises of a new you in 90 days. She spoke fast, words tumbling over each other about strength, energy, confidence, and how she wanted to feel like herself again. I listened, half proud, half surprised. Lisa had always been steady, content with family photos on the mantle and weekend barbecues in the backyard. Now she was talking about targets, routines, and personal trainers. She spread the pamphlet out on the coffee table, her finger tracing the cost of the package. It wasn't cheap. I told her it didn't matter. If this made her happy, if it gave her back the spark she felt she'd lost, then I was in. 20 years of marriage had taught me that sometimes you invest not in what you need, but in what your partner thinks will make them whole. At that moment, I believed this was just another phase. The backyard used to be a place for family barbecues, birthday balloons tied to the fence, the kids racing across the patchy lawn while Lisa and I clinked glasses on the porch. Now it had turned into her stage. She propped her phone against a tripod, adjusted the angle, and dropped to the ground for push-ups, narrating each rep with a bright, unfamiliar energy. Her voice wasn't for us anymore. It was for the little red light blinking on her screen. I stood at the kitchen window, watching through the glass. Grace appeared beside me, silent at first, hugging the pillow she carried everywhere. She leaned close and whispered, almost ashamed to say it out loud, "Mom talks to her phone more than she talks to us." The words hit harder than I expected. I swallowed, forcing a smile, telling her Mom was just excited about her progress. But inside, I felt something buckle. The family we had built was still there in walls and photographs, yet a piece of it was already slipping into a world of followers and strangers' praise. One evening, I opened the closet to grab a shirt and stopped cold. The rows of dresses and blouses Lisa had worn for years, the floral prints she wore to family dinners, the soft sweaters she curled into on Sunday mornings, were gone. In their place hung racks of sleek gym wear, neon leggings, sports bras, cropped tops, brand names I'd never heard of. The colors were bold, loud, almost defiant. Boxes from online orders still sat on the floor, tissue paper spilling out like discarded skins. I traced my hand over the empty hangers where her old clothes used to be, the outfits I associated with birthdays, anniversaries, the life we'd shared. It felt as though she had packed away not just fabric, but a version of herself I could no longer reach. That night, when she walked past me on her way out, a new scent lingered in the air, sharp, confident, foreign. It wasn't the perfume she'd worn for 2 decades. It was something bolder, and it stayed with me long after the door closed behind her. Dinner used to be our anchor. No matter how busy work got, no matter what the kids had going on, we sat down together. The table was where we traded stories, laughed at my tired jokes, and reminded each other that we were a family. Lately, the chairs stayed empty. Lisa always had a reason: training late, meeting with partners, prepping for some event I'd never heard of until that day. I told Ethan and Grace to eat without her, that she'd join us next time. But next time never came. Ethan started slipping out after meals, muttering something about friends or basketball practice. Grace pushed her food around her plate, earbuds tucked in, retreating into music instead of conversation. The clatter of silverware echoed too loud against the silence. I tried to fill the void with talk about school, weekend plans, anything to keep the air alive, but the words floated unanswered. One night I looked around and realized we weren't gathered anymore. We were just 3 people occupying the same house, each of us behind our own closed door. I went into the garage one Saturday, meaning only to grab the jumper cables. Lisa's car was parked at an angle, the trunk half open like she'd left in a hurry. Out of habit, I closed it properly, and that's when I saw it, a small suitcase tucked neatly against the side. Not the kind you use for groceries or gym shoes, but the kind you pack when you don't know how long you'll be gone. I lifted it halfway, felt the weight of folded clothes inside. A toiletry bag peeked from the corner, the zipper half undone, a toothbrush and travel-sized perfume rolling loose. My stomach tightened. She hadn't mentioned any overnight trips. No work conferences, no girls' weekends, nothing that explained why her car was ready for an absence. I told myself maybe it was for one of those fitness events she kept attending. Maybe she just wanted to be prepared. I closed the trunk gently, as though the suitcase might explode if I slammed it. Walking back into the house, I carried the lie with me. She must be going to an event. I sat on the porch that night, the glow from my phone lighting my face more than the porch lamp above me. The house was quiet, too quiet. Lisa hadn't come home yet, and the kids had retreated to their rooms. I opened my messages and scrolled through until I landed on Carol's name. She had been our friend for years, close enough to be family, the kind of person you trusted when you couldn't trust yourself. I typed slowly, hesitating between words. Do you think Lisa's been different? Seconds stretched before the typing dots appeared. Carol's reply came fast, almost like she'd been waiting for me to ask. This isn't normal anymore, Daniel. The words stung because I'd known it too. I just hadn't wanted to see it written down, undeniable on a glowing screen. I asked her what I was supposed to do. She didn't offer comfort, not this time. Instead, she sent one more message, short and sharp, a name I hadn't thought about in years. Talk to Frank. Frank Dawson lived 2 doors down, in the same brick house he'd owned since the 80s. I remembered him as the neighbor who mowed his lawn with military precision and waved stiffly from his porch. What most people didn't know, what Carol reminded me of, was that Frank had spent decades as a private investigator before retiring. When I knocked on his door, he answered in a worn flannel shirt, his eyes sharp despite the years. He listened as I stumbled through the story. Lisa's new life, the suitcase, the hours that didn't add up. He didn't interrupt, didn't soften the edges. When I finally ran out of words, he leaned back in his chair, hands folded, and asked me the one question I had been avoiding. Do you really want to know the truth, Daniel? Even if it breaks you? The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I thought of Ethan and Grace upstairs in their rooms, waiting for a version of their mother that might not exist anymore. My throat tightened, but I nodded. Yes, I wanted to know. Frank's study smelled of old books and black coffee. The desk was cluttered with file folders, a magnifying glass, and a laptop that looked far newer than the rest of the room. He motioned for me to sit as he opened the computer. Most people don't realize how much their phone keeps track of, he said, typing with surprising speed. If her iCloud is synced, we'll see where she really goes. My pulse hammered as I gave him the login. Within seconds, a map bloomed on the screen, blue dots trailing Lisa's movements, timestamp after timestamp. At first, it looked harmless. The routes matched her story: the gym downtown, the grocery store, the school pickup. But Frank zoomed in, filtered by date, and the pattern shifted. Several mornings she claimed to be training at the fitness center, yet the GPS showed her car parked across town. Afternoons that should have ended at yoga class ended instead at an address I didn't recognize. Frank sat back, his face grim. "That's not the gym," he said quietly. My stomach clenched. Nothing lined up anymore. Frank enlarged the map until the streets of Dallas spread wide across the screen. The blue dots pulsed like warnings, clustering in two locations that stood out against the rest. One was a residential tower in Uptown, far from any gym Lisa had ever mentioned. The other was a hotel parking lot just off the freeway. He overlaid the timestamps with the schedule Lisa had given me, her so-called heavy training sessions. The match was undeniable. The morning she swore she was at the gym pushing through new routines, the map showed her phone idling in that same high-rise. On the day she told me she was staying late for special classes, the signal sat parked outside the hotel for hours. Frank didn't look at me right away. He just scrolled, letting the evidence pile up in silence. I felt a sick rhythm form in my chest, every ping on that map like a nail driven deeper. She hadn't just lied once. She had built a whole new life on top of mine, down to the minute. Carol called me over one evening, her face lit by the glow of her phone. "I set up a burner account," she said, scrolling through Instagram. Lisa accepted the follow request. I leaned closer. On Lisa's page, every post was polished. Workout clips, filtered selfies, motivational captions about transformation and discipline. Hundreds of likes, comments dripping with admiration. But Carol wasn't showing me the public feed. She tapped into the private stories, the ones meant only for her close friends. That's where I saw it. A name that kept appearing in the comments and tags. Tyler Brooks. His replies weren't just professional tips. They carried a tone too personal, too familiar. Lisa's responses were even worse. Playful, flirty, the kind of words she hadn't used with me in years. Then Carol pulled up an archived live stream. Lisa had been doing squats, sweat shining under the lights. She paused mid-set to laugh at something in the chat. "My guide," she called him, smiling in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in a long, long time. Back in Frank's study, the glow of his laptop washed across stacks of old case files. He typed with the ease of a man who had spent decades digging into other people's secrets. Within minutes, he pulled up a property record for the Uptown address that had appeared so many times on Lisa's location history. "There it is," he muttered, turning the screen toward me. The name stared back. Tyler Brooks. My chest tightened. The trainer from her Instagram, the man she called her guide, wasn't just some passing connection. He lived there, at the very spot her phone kept returning to. Frank tapped through the details. The building wasn't zoned for commercial use. No fitness studio, no training facility, nothing but residential apartments. Whatever Lisa was doing there, it wasn't exercise. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles whitening. For weeks, I'd told myself she was just caught up in a new lifestyle, in vanity, in chasing attention. But now the pieces were locking into place, pointing to a truth I didn't want to see spelled out. Frank slid a thumb drive into his computer and pulled up grainy security footage from a parking lot camera near the hotel. The image was distant but clear enough to erase doubt. There she was, Lisa, stepping out of her car in workout clothes, her hair pulled back, eyes scanning the lot before she walked quickly toward the entrance. I leaned forward, unable to blink. The timestamp glowed in the corner, 9:12 a.m. That was the morning she'd told me she had an extended session at the gym. Frank skipped ahead. Hours passed in seconds on the screen. Then, at 12:47 p.m., the door opened again. Lisa emerged, the same bag slung over her shoulder, her pace slower now, almost casual. She disappeared into her car and drove away as if nothing had happened. Frank didn't narrate, didn't need to. The dates and times stamped on the footage spoke louder than any accusation. Each glowing number hammered into me like a verdict, each frame another nail sealing the coffin of denial I'd built for myself. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort but suffocates. I sat at my desk, the glow of Lisa's laptop screen casting long shadows across the walls. Frank had shown me how to dig deeper, old drafts, unsent posts hidden in her account. My hand trembled on the mouse as I opened the folder. There it was, a draft she'd never published. The words felt like they were carved directly into me. I'm still married, but I only feel free when I'm with him. I read the sentence again and again, hoping the letters would rearrange themselves into something less cruel, something I could pretend away. But they didn't change. They stared back at me, sharp and merciless, each word stripping another layer off the life I thought I knew. For 20 years, I believed freedom was what we gave each other. Trust, space, room to breathe. But in her eyes, freedom was escape. Freedom was him. And the moment I read it, my chest hollowed out. My heart felt like nothing but an empty shell. I stood frozen on the staircase, the draft still burning in my head like a confession carved in stone. The banister pressed hard against my palm, grounding me as my chest fought for air. The house felt hollow, every sound amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old wood beneath my feet. Grace appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching the pillow she always carried when she felt unsettled. She didn't say anything at first, just looked down at me with those wide, searching eyes, eyes that still believed I could make sense of the world for her. As she passed by, her small voice cut through the silence. "Dad, are you okay?" I tried to answer, but the words stuck. My mouth moved, but all I managed was a nod, a weak attempt at reassurance I didn't believe myself. She lingered for a moment, as if she knew more than she should at her age, then disappeared into her room. The pillow stayed pressed against her chest, the same way I pressed the railing against mine. The afternoon bell rang, and the schoolyard filled with the shuffle of sneakers and the shouts of kids breaking free. I parked by the curb, watching Ethan weave through the crowd, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Normally, he would slide into the passenger seat with some story about practice, a joke from his friends, anything to fill the silence. That day, he opened the door and buckled in without a word. His eyes stayed fixed on the window, tracing the lines of the baseball field as we pulled away. I asked about his day, and he just shrugged. I mentioned dinner, and he shook his head. The quiet between us felt heavier than the traffic pressing against the windshield. Finally, at a red light, he spoke. His voice was low, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Dad, is something going on at home?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the leather creaking beneath my hands. My son was old enough to see the cracks. I just wasn't ready to name them out loud. The next morning, I laced up my old running shoes, the pair gathering dust in the closet, and headed to the park. The air was cool, sharp against my lungs as I pushed myself onto the trail. I hadn't run in months, maybe years, but I needed the rhythm, the pounding of my feet against the path, the steadiness of breath in and out. It was the only way I knew to quiet the storm inside my chest. Each lap around the park peeled away another layer of denial. With every stride, I replayed the images. Lisa walking into the hotel, the words on that unsent post, the perfume that didn't belong to me. Sweat ran down my face, but it couldn't wash away the truth pressing heavier with each step. By the time I slowed near the fountain, I wasn't calmer. I was clearer. Love wasn't enough to blind me anymore. My kids deserved a father who knew, not one who hid. If Lisa had built a secret life, I was going to uncover every brick of it. I decided then I would gather every piece of evidence. The printer hummed in the corner, spitting out sheets one after another, grainy stills from the parking lot, screenshots of GPS maps, copies of the drafts I wished I'd never read. I spread them across the kitchen table, each page like a shard of glass I couldn't stop touching. Under the yellow glow of the overhead light, the evidence didn't just prove betrayal. It transformed my home into a crime scene, and I was both detective and victim. I took photos with my phone, organizing everything into folders, then saved them all onto a small silver USB. The drive felt heavier than it should, as if the weight of 20 years of marriage could fit inside something no bigger than my thumb. The clock ticked past 9, then 10. The house was still except for the printer's cooling fan and the faint creak of Ethan and Grace moving upstairs. I sat at the table, staring at the pile I had built, the USB lying in the center like a loaded gun. All I could do now was wait for Lisa to walk through the door. The front door creaked, and the night air slipped into the house with her. Lisa's voice carried ahead of her footsteps, bright and practiced, as if she'd just stepped off a stage. She swung a tote bag over her shoulder, plastic gift bags dangling from her hands, trinkets and freebies from what she called a fitness conference. Her heels clicked across the hardwood as she spoke into her phone, laughing too loudly at some joke I couldn't hear. The kids stirred upstairs, doors opening a crack before shutting again, the way children do when they don't want to be pulled into something heavy. I sat in the kitchen, motionless, my arms folded on the table. The USB rested beside my elbow, waiting. The house smelled faintly of her new perfume, sharp and floral, cutting through the warmth of cooked vegetables I'd made hours earlier but left untouched. She walked past the doorway, still talking, still smiling. I finally spoke her name, just her name, firm enough to cut through her call and drop it dead in the air. She stepped into the kitchen, still holding the phone like she wasn't sure whether to hang up or pretend the conversation mattered more than the silence between us. I pointed to the chair across from me. For a moment she hesitated, then sat, her smile fading as she noticed the papers scattered across the table. Without a word, I slid the laptop forward and pressed play. The grainy footage filled the screen. Lisa stepping out of her car, looking around before walking toward the hotel entrance. Her figure was unmistakable, even in low resolution. The timestamp glowed in the corner, exact down to the minute she had told me she was at the gym. Her chest rose and fell, shallow and uneven. She reached for the gift bag on her lap as if rummaging could erase the image. Then her voice cut through, sharp and defensive. "You had no right to dig into my life. You're invading my privacy." I kept my eyes on her, the cold light of the video reflecting off both our faces. Privacy, that's what she called it. Her words still hung in the air, privacy, like it was some shield she could hide behind. I didn't answer. Instead, I clicked open the next folder. The GPS logs lit up the screen, pins scattered across Dallas, each one stamped with dates and times. "You said you were training downtown," I said quietly, my finger tracing the map. "But your phone was parked here, and here. Always the same places. Not the gym. Not once." Her lips parted, searching for an excuse, but I didn't give her room. Another click, and the drafts appeared. Words she had written with her own hands. Words never meant for me to see. "I only feel free when I'm with him." I pushed the laptop closer. Her eyes darted across the lines, then back to me, panic flickering beneath the anger. She opened her mouth again, but I cut her off. "You call this privacy," I said, my voice steady. "I call it betrayal." For the first time in months, she had nothing rehearsed to say, just silence, and the glow of her lies staring back at her. She pushed back from the table, the chair legs screeching across the floor, and stormed into the living room. I followed, carrying the laptop like a weapon I didn't want but couldn't put down. Lisa's shoulders shook as she dropped onto the couch, her hands covering her face. The sound of her crying filled the room, but it wasn't the cry of remorse. It was sharp, angry, like a child caught red-handed. Tears streaked her cheeks as she lowered her hands, glaring at me through swollen eyes. "You've been watching me, spying on me like some prison guard," she snapped. Her voice cracked, but her words cut with precision. "This isn't about me, Daniel. It never was. You don't want a partner. You want a submissive wife who cooks, cleans, smiles on command." I stood there, the glow of the paused video still flickering on the laptop screen. For years I had defended her, covered for her, believed her stories. Now she sat in front of me, turning her betrayal into my crime. And for the first time I felt the anger settle into something sharper. Clarity. Her words echoed in the room, accusing, twisting everything upside down. I set the laptop on the coffee table and sat across from her, leaning forward, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I don't want obedience," I said, my voice low but steady. "I don't want some scripted version of marriage you think I've demanded. I want the truth. That's all I've ever wanted." She looked away, her breath hitching, mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes. "The truth?" she repeated, almost scoffing. "The truth is, I feel alive with him. With you, I feel invisible." The words should have broken me. Instead, they sharpened something inside. I stood, pointing to the suitcase she'd left half-packed in the corner weeks ago. "Then you've already made your choice. If that's your life, take it. But you leave tonight. Not tomorrow, not after another excuse. Tonight." Her head jerked up, eyes wide, searching for hesitation in my face. There was none. I had already crossed the line from doubt into decision. She disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps hard against the floorboards, and I followed at a distance. In the bedroom, she yanked the closet doors open, pulling the suitcase free from where it had been waiting all along. Clothes tumbled as she stuffed them inside without folding, every movement sharp, furious. "I'll come back for the rest later," she muttered, snapping the zipper closed. Her voice carried no softness, no regret, just the flat practicality of someone planning her next move. I stood in the doorway, my hand braced against the frame, watching the woman I'd shared half my life with pack like a stranger. "If you do," I said evenly, "you'll give me notice. I won't have Ethan or Grace watch you walk out again. They don't deserve that." She froze for a moment, the suitcase handle clenched in her grip. Then she lifted it without answering, her eyes avoiding mine. The wheels rattled across the floor, each roll sounding like the final punctuation on 20 years we had built together. The suitcase rattled across the hardwood, down the hall, and then the front door opened with a low groan. For a heartbeat she stood there, back turned, shoulders stiff, before stepping out into the night. The latch caught, and the heavy thud of the door closing reverberated through the house like a final verdict. The deadbolt clicked into place on its own, the sound stretching longer in my ears than it should have. Silence settled in, thicker than before. No perfume lingering, no voice calling from the hallway, just the empty rhythm of a home missing one of its walls. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, my chest heavy but my face strangely calm. Then I turned and walked to the base of the stairs. My voice carried upward, steadier than I expected. "Ethan, Grace, come downstairs." The house shifted. Doors creaked open above me. Footsteps hesitated on the steps, 2 sets of them, uncertain, cautious. They had heard enough through walls and whispers. Now it was time they heard the rest from me. We sat together on the sofa, the 3 of us, the air between us heavy with questions they were too afraid to ask. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the carpet. Grace curled against the armrest, her pillow clutched tight, eyes already glistening before I said a word. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Your mom and we're not the same anymore," I began. My voice didn't shake, but I felt the weight of every syllable. "She's made choices that don't belong in a marriage. I can't pretend for you, and I won't lie to protect anyone's image. You deserve the truth." Ethan didn't move, his jaw set, eyes fixed on some invisible point on the floor. Grace let out a soft sob, burying her face into the pillow. I wanted to hold them both, to tell them everything would be okay, but that wasn't mine to promise anymore. "We'll still be a family," I said quietly. "Just a different one." And in that moment, the silence between us said more than any comfort I could offer. That night I lay in bed alone for the first time in 20 years. The mattress felt bigger than it ever had, the sheets colder, the shadows deeper. The room was the same dresser, same photos on the wall, same faint hum from the streetlight outside. But without her breathing beside me, it felt like a cavern. I stared at the ceiling, counting the faint cracks in the paint, each one a reminder of the fractures now running through my life. The silence pressed down hard, not the comforting quiet of rest, but the suffocating stillness of absence. Every creak in the house sounded louder, every gust of wind through the window sharper. For weeks I had fought the thought, tried to bury it beneath excuses and blind hope. But there, in that bed stripped of her presence, I could no longer deny it. The ache inside me finally shaped itself into something I could name. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't confusion. It was betrayal. Full, undeniable, and mine to carry. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper and a pen, the same way I used to plan budgets and work projects. Only this time, I was drafting a different kind of plan, a map for survival. Across the top, I wrote the days of the week. Underneath, I started filling the boxes with the things Lisa used to handle, the things we'd once shared. Breakfast prep, school drop-offs, chores, errands. It wasn't elegant, just black ink on white paper, but it gave me something solid to hold on to. Ethan would handle the trash on Tuesdays and Saturdays. Grace would set the table and help with laundry. I added my own notes, morning runs, grocery trips, family dinners at 7. I taped the schedule to the fridge and called them over. They studied it, uncertain at first, then nodded slowly. Grace traced her finger over her name. Ethan gave a small shrug, but I saw the relief in his eyes. "This is us now," I said. "We'll manage. We don't need anyone else to keep this house standing. We can do it ourselves." The kitchen smelled of onions and garlic sizzling in the pan, a smell I hadn't noticed in weeks. I was chopping carrots when Grace padded in, hair still messy from sleep, pillow marks on her cheek. Normally she would grab a cereal bar and vanish upstairs, but this morning she lingered. Without a word, she opened the fridge, pulled out a bundle of green beans, and set them on the counter. "Can I help?" she asked, her voice small but steady. I handed her a knife, watching carefully as she mimicked my movements. Her hands were clumsy at first, slices uneven, but her focus was fierce. We stood side by side, the rhythm of blade against cutting board filling the silence that had once been broken by Lisa's voice. When Grace looked up, a tiny smile tugged at her lips. For the first time since everything cracked open, there was no distance, no avoidance, just us, shoulder to shoulder, making a meal together. The kitchen felt different in that moment, warmer. A single beat of family life had returned, fragile but real. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the cracked pavement of the school's basketball court. Ethan stayed behind after practice, dribbling the ball alone while his teammates packed up and left. I leaned against the chain-link fence, watching him move, quick, focused, every bounce echoing in the empty lot. He didn't look my way, but I knew he saw me. He pushed harder, driving to the hoop, missing once, then again, until sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. I could see the frustration in the way he slammed the ball to the ground, the way he tried to shake something off that had nothing to do with basketball. I didn't shout instructions. I didn't tell him to pack it up. I just stayed, arms folded, steady as the fence behind me. When he finally sank a shot, he turned, breathless, his eyes flicking to mine. I nodded, simple and sure. "I'm here, son." The words weren't loud, but they carried across the court. For the first time in days, his shoulders eased. I hadn't been to that little cafe downtown in years, the one with scratched wooden tables and the smell of burnt espresso lingering in the air. An old colleague had called me up out of the blue, insisting we catch up over lunch. I almost said no, habit maybe, or the guilt of stepping outside the shell my life had become. But something in me said yes. We sat by the window, and he talked about projects, mutual friends, the years that had slipped past us. I listened, nodding, laughing at stories I'd forgotten, realizing how much of myself I'd buried beneath Lisa's routines and demands. When the check came, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "It's good to see you again, Dan. You look lighter." Walking back to my car, coffee cup still warm in my hand, the words stuck with me. Lighter. Not because life was easier, it wasn't, but because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't orbiting someone else's gravity. I'd been living in Lisa's shadow for years, and only now did I see the weight of it. Carol's place smelled faintly of cinnamon, the same way it always had when Lisa and I visited for holidays. But this time, Lisa wasn't beside me. Carol led me into her study, where a neat stack of papers and a flash drive sat waiting on the desk. "I saved everything," she said softly, sliding the folder across to me. Inside were screenshots, message logs, photos, copies of the evidence Frank and I had already uncovered, preserved in case anything disappeared. Each page felt heavier than the last, as if proof had its own gravity. I looked at her, unsure what to say. She'd been Lisa's friend as much as mine, maybe more, yet here she was handing me the pieces of a life unraveling. Carol's eyes held steady on mine. "You'll need this," she said. "Maybe for court. Maybe just for yourself. Either way, don't throw it away." I nodded, tucking the folder under my arm, realizing the truth wasn't just something to face, it was something to keep, to hold on to, whether I wanted to or not. From the outside, her new apartment gleamed with glass and polished steel, a modern box perched high above the city. Inside, though, it was colder than any home we had built together. The camera of memory I can't turn off shows her sitting at the dining table with Tyler, plates of untouched food between them, both of them bent over their phones. Notifications chimed like background music, every buzz pulling her attention further away from the room she was in. Lisa laughed at something on her screen, the sound hollow, forced. Tyler didn't look up, didn't even acknowledge her. He scrolled, answered a text, smirked at a message she couldn't see. The glow of their devices lit their faces more than the candles she had set out, trying to make the place feel like a home. Later, when the night stretched thin, Tyler grabbed his jacket, muttered something vague about plans, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Lisa sat in silence, staring at the plates, the cold food, and the empty chair across from her. I can picture it even though I wasn't there. Lisa in Tyler's apartment, the glow of his phone left carelessly on the counter. She reached for it, maybe out of suspicion, maybe out of desperation to feel secure. The screen lit up, and there it was, a string of messages from women whose names she didn't know. Photos, words stripped of subtlety, promises typed in the dark. They weren't clients, they were replacements waiting their turn. Her breath must have caught the same way mine had when I first saw the footage. She scrolled faster, her pulse racing as the truth unfolded line by line. When Tyler walked back into the room, she confronted him, the phone trembling in her hand. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He just shrugged, his voice flat, careless. "I never promised you fidelity." The words gutted her. What she had called freedom, what she had chosen over 20 years of family, was nothing more than convenience to him. Lisa left Tyler's apartment within weeks, dragging her suitcase once more, only this time there was no one waiting on the other side. She signed a short lease on a cramped studio across town, a place with peeling paint and a view of nothing but brick walls. Her glossy posts still showed smiling selfies, motivational quotes, and clean meal preps, but behind the camera the studio echoed with emptiness. The brand partnerships she had boasted about began to slip away one by one. Emails went unanswered, contracts dissolved quietly. New fitness influencers appeared on the scene every day, younger, shinier, more consistent. Her content started to blur together. Same poses, same captions, same strained enthusiasm. The likes dwindled, comments slowed. Followers drifted off as if they had smelled the truth through the screen. What once felt like momentum now looked like desperation. I didn't need to see it firsthand. Word trickled back, fragments from Carol, whispers from mutual friends. The empire Lisa left us for wasn't collapsing in flames. It was rotting slowly, post by post, while she sat alone in that small room. Nights grew long in her studio. I imagined Lisa sitting cross-legged on the bed, the glow of her phone the only light in the room. She opened a message window to Grace, typed a line, erased it. Tried again with Ethan, deleted it. Over and over, the words came and vanished. Apologies that sounded rehearsed, promises that rang hollow, confessions she didn't have the courage to send. Finally, she switched to video. Her face filled the frame, older somehow, the confidence stripped away. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I've made mistakes. I was selfish. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to see you. I want to try again." The file appeared in my inbox first, attached to a short note asking me to share it with the kids. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the thumbnail, her frozen mid-blink, caught between the person she once was and the stranger she had become. My finger hovered over the play button, the weight of a father's choice pressing down on me. I called them into the living room, the three of us sitting in a line on the couch. The television stayed dark. Instead, I balanced my phone in my hand, the screen glowing small and unsteady. "This came from your mom," I said. My voice was careful, measured. Grace leaned closer immediately, clutching her pillow tight. Ethan stayed back, arms crossed, his face unreadable. I pressed play. Lisa's face filled the screen, her words spilling out in fragments. Apologies, explanations, pleas for another chance. She said she loved them. She said she'd lost her way. She said she wanted to try to rebuild. Grace's tears fell silently, her pillow damp before the video even ended. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch. When it finished, he simply stood and handed the phone back without a word. Grace shook her head, whispering, "I can't," before retreating upstairs. I sat alone for a long moment, the phone heavy in my hand. Whatever Lisa wanted, they weren't ready to give. Not yet. The park was nearly empty at dawn, just a few dog walkers and the echo of my footsteps against the path. The air was cold enough to sting, each breath burning my lungs, but the rhythm steadied me. Step after step, lap after lap, my body found a pattern my mind had lost. I ran past the fountain, the benches where couples sometimes sat, the trees stripped bare by the season. Every corner carried a memory, Picnics we'd had as a family, soccer games with Ethan, Grace chasing fireflies. Those memories didn't hurt anymore. They anchored me. Proof that something real had existed before the lies. The wind whipped across my face, and for the first time I didn't feel crushed by the weight of it all. I wasn't running from pain. I was running with it, learning its shape, letting it settle without controlling me. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing what she'd done. It was about refusing to let it own me. I could forgive in time, but I would never forget. The old SUV sat in the driveway like a relic of another life. Mud-stained floor mats from road trips, fast food wrappers the kids had left in the back, a faint trace of Lisa's perfume lingering in the upholstery. It had been the family car, the one we piled into for vacations we barely took, the one that carried us to birthdays, graduations, and 1,000 errands in between. But every time I slid behind the wheel, it felt like driving through ghosts. So I listed it for sale, met a young couple who needed the space for their first baby, and handed over the keys without ceremony. Watching them drive away, I felt lighter, as if I'd shed more than just metal and wheels. In its place, I bought a smaller car, practical, fuel-efficient, nothing flashy. Just enough for me, Ethan, and Grace. When I parked it in the garage, the space felt new again, stripped of memories that no longer served us. It wasn't just a car. It was a step, a tangible sign that our life was no longer tied to hers. The new car hummed steadily as we headed down the highway, the horizon stretching wide and open before us. Ethan sat in the passenger seat with his earbuds in, staring out at the endless fields. Grace was in the back, sketching something in her notebook, her lips moving quietly to the rhythm of a song only she could hear. For a long time, none of us spoke. The tires beat a soft rhythm against the asphalt, mile markers flashing by like silent witnesses. I glanced at them in the rearview mirror, my son withdrawn, my daughter trying to distract herself, and I felt both the loss and the strength of what remained. When we stopped for gas, Grace leaned forward and asked, "Dad, is this still family?" Her voice was fragile, as if she was testing the ground before stepping onto it. I put a hand on her shoulder, looked at both of them, and said simply, "Yes, we're a family. It just looks different now. Some days it'll feel right, some days it won't." And in that moment, the silence in the car softened. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh cornbread filled my parents' kitchen, a scent that carried me straight back to childhood. The table was set with mismatched plates, the kind that had survived decades of family meals. My mother moved briskly between stove and counter, humming under her breath, while my father poured iced tea into tall glasses. Ethan and Grace sat across from me, quieter than usual at first, but the warmth of that old kitchen had a way of breaking down walls. My father teased Grace about the way she picked peas out of her plate, and she laughed in spite of herself. Then my mother asked Ethan about school, and for the first time in weeks, he answered more than one word at a time. Soon, stories started rolling, about classes, about basketball, about a prank one of his friends pulled. His voice grew animated, his hands moving as he talked, and I just sat there, soaking it in. The food was simple, nothing fancy, but the laughter that echoed around that table was richer than any feast. The road back stretched quiet under the fading light, the car filled with the low hum of tires against pavement. Grace had fallen asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window, her notebook still open on her lap. Ethan sat beside me, earbuds dangling around his neck, staring at the horizon where the sun dipped into the fields. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, out of nowhere, his voice cut through the steady drone of the engine. "You know, Dad, I used to think our family was perfect." I gripped the wheel tighter, waiting for the sting, but it never came. I glanced at him, his profile outlined against the dusky sky, and shook my head. "We weren't perfect, Ethan. We just worked hard to keep everything standing." He frowned, thinking it over, and I added, "But now we're something better. We're honest, and that's worth more than perfect ever was." He nodded slowly, turning back to the horizon, and for the first time in weeks, I saw his shoulders relax. Later that week, Grace called me into her room. The walls were covered with sketches and Polaroids, her world of color and tape and doodles. She sat cross-legged on the floor, a small scrapbook balanced on her knees. Without saying much, she held it out to me. The cover was decorated with stickers, the edges rough with glue. I opened it carefully, and inside were pages filled with pieces of our life, family photos from birthdays, little notes I'd scribbled for her lunchbox, even movie tickets taped beside her handwriting. Best night ever. On one page, she'd copied down the corny phrases I always repeated at dinner, the ones she used to roll her eyes at. Each turn of the page tightened my throat. It wasn't just a scrapbook. It was proof that she'd been collecting fragments of us all along, even while the house was unraveling. On the last page, in bold letters traced with care, she had written, "Thank you for being real, Dad." I closed the book gently, fighting the tears I didn't want her to see. The law office smelled faintly of leather and paper, the kind of place where people came to redraw the lines of their lives. I sat across from a man in a dark suit, his desk stacked with files that weren't mine but felt familiar. Marriages gone wrong, families divided. I laid it all out. 20 years together, 2 kids, a house still under mortgage, accounts half in her name and half in mine. I asked about separation, about divorce, about custody. I wanted to know what the courts would see, what my children would face, what I should prepare for. The lawyer listened, tapping his pen against a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back and spoke with the calm of someone who'd said the same words 100 times. "You can file tomorrow if you want," he said. "You have enough. But my advice? Go slow. Make sure the kids come first. Paperwork can wait. Their stability can't." I nodded, the weight of his words settling deeper than any statute. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about protecting Ethan and Grace from being collateral damage. The sun was sinking low, painting the court in long shadows. Ethan and I stood at the free throw line, the ball heavy in my hands. I bounced it once, twice, then passed it to him. He caught it clean, set his feet, and shot. The ball hit the rim, rolled, and dropped through. He didn't smile. We played in silence for a while, the steady rhythm of dribbling and shooting filling the air where words used to be. Finally, he stopped, holding the ball against his hip. His eyes flicked up to mine, guarded but searching. "Dad," he said quietly, "are you mad at Mom?" The question hung in the air heavier than any ball. I walked closer, resting my hands on my knees to meet his gaze. "I'm mad at the lies," I told him. "At the way she hid things, broke trust. But mad at her? No. People make choices. Bad ones. It's the dishonesty I can't forgive, not the person." He nodded slowly, then dribbled once and took another shot. This time, when it swished clean through the net, he let himself smile. The supermarket on a Saturday morning was buzzing, carts squeaking, announcements crackling over the intercom, kids begging for candy down every aisle. Grace walked beside me, a list in her hand, determined to act like my second in command. We paused in front of the cereal shelves, an entire wall of color and sugar staring back at us. She pointed to a bright box with marshmallows. "This one," she declared. I shook my head, reaching for the plain oats. "Too much sugar. You'll be bouncing off the walls." Her eyes narrowed, playful but firm. "Then at least get almond milk. Regular milk is gross." We went back and forth, stacking arguments like lawyers presenting a case. Health benefits, taste tests, who actually had to pour it in the morning. Other shoppers passed, smiling at the scene, but for us, it was more than a debate. It was laughter in the middle of an aisle, the sound of something ordinary stitching itself back into our days. In the end, we compromised. 1 box of oats, 1 of marshmallows, and yes, almond milk. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that comes only after both kids are asleep and the day has finally given up its fight. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen washing over a stack of unpaid bills and school permission slips. Her name lit up my inbox. My pulse quickened before I even clicked. The message was short, clipped, written like a business memo. She wanted to see Ethan and Grace, she said, just to give them gifts. No explanation, no apology, just the promise of boxes wrapped in shiny paper, as if toys or gadgets could patch over the fracture she had carved into them. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for something more. Nothing came. So I began to type. My reply was slower, deliberate. You can see them, but only when you're ready to tell them the truth, not before. I hit send and leaned back, the weight of the decision settling in. Gifts meant nothing without honesty. I imagine her sitting in that cramped studio, the blinds half closed against the city lights, phone propped up on a stack of books. This time, her face on the screen looked different when the video reached me. Less polished, less rehearsed. She didn't try to sell an image. She didn't lean on excuses. Her voice was low, raw, the words halting. She admitted she had hurt us, admitted she had chased something that wasn't real. She said she missed the kids, not in the broad strokes of a mother playing for sympathy, but in the small details. Ethan's quiet jokes, Grace's habit of humming when she drew. When she said Grace's name, her voice broke. Tears welled, then spilled, and she didn't bother to stop the camera. For once, she didn't hide behind performance. I watched the whole thing in silence, the phone heavy in my hands. This wasn't the woman who stormed out with a suitcase. It was someone cracked open, stripped bare by her own choices. Whether that mattered anymore, I wasn't sure. We gathered in the living room again, the same spot where so many heavy truths had already been laid bare. I held my phone out, asked them both to sit. Grace curled up on one end of the sofa, pillow clutched to her chest. Ethan slouched at the other, arms crossed, jaw tight. I pressed play. Lisa's face appeared, tired, stripped of polish. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and when she said Grace's name, the tears came. Grace didn't look away. She watched every second, eyes glassy but unblinking. Ethan lasted barely a minute before he pushed off the sofa and muttered, "I don't need this." He walked down the hall, his bedroom door closing hard enough to shake the frame. The video ended, silence filling the space between me and Grace. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, then whispered, "What do we do, Dad?" I set the phone down and pulled her close. "We don't rush it," I told her. "No one has to forgive right away. We'll take it one step at a time." The trailhead was only a half-hour's drive from home, but stepping onto it felt like crossing into another world. The morning air was crisp, pine needles soft under our shoes, the sound of birds replacing the constant hum of city traffic. Ethan carried a backpack with water bottles. Grace clutched her camera, already snapping pictures of every twisted branch and wildflower she saw. We walked in rhythm, sometimes talking, sometimes quiet, the kind of silence that didn't feel heavy anymore. At the overlook, the valley stretched out beneath us, sunlight breaking through the clouds in golden streaks. Grace set the camera on a rock, the timer blinking red. "Come on," she said, tugging Ethan and me together. We stood awkwardly at first, then leaned in as the shutter clicked. The photo captured the three of us, messy hair, tired smiles, no perfection, no pretense. Just us. Later, when I looked at the picture on Grace's screen, I realized it was the first family photo without Lisa, and somehow it didn't feel empty. It felt like a beginning. Sunday morning, the community center buzzed with familiar faces, neighbors, old friends, people who had known us as the Hayes family for years. Grace tugged at my sleeve. Ethan lingered near the bulletin board, pretending not to notice the curious glances. A woman from down the street approached, her smile polite but her eyes sharp with questions. "Daniel, we've missed seeing Lisa. Is everything all right?" For a split second, I felt the weight of truth pressing at my lips, the urge to spill everything, to show them the photos, the videos, the evidence that had torn us apart. But I didn't. I forced a steady smile, nodded once, and said, "We're managing. The kids are doing well." It wasn't a lie, not exactly. It was the only part of the story that mattered in that moment. As we left, Ethan nudged me. "You didn't tell them?" "No," I said, holding the door for Grace. "Not everything needs to be told. Sometimes dignity means carrying the story yourself." And for the first time, I believed it. The diner smelled of coffee and fried bacon, the kind of place where time seemed to pause somewhere around 1975. I slid into a booth across from Frank, his worn leather jacket creaking as he leaned back, eyes sharp even in retirement. He stirred his coffee slowly, then looked at me over the rim of the cup. "The truth sets a man free," he said, "but it's dignity that keeps him standing once the dust settles. Don't forget that, Daniel. Don't let anger write your story." I nodded, letting the words sink in. He'd lived a life of chasing lies, digging into people's darkest corners. If anyone knew what truth could do to a man, it was Frank. The waitress came by with a pot of coffee, and I ordered a slice of apple pie for both of us. Frank smirked. "Pie at 10 in the morning?" "On me," I said, managing a smile. "It's the least I can do." For the first time in a long while, the sweetness didn't feel like a mask. It felt like a small reward for surviving. Lisa had parked half a block away, waiting, hoping Tyler's text meant he'd be alone. Instead, she saw him first, arms slung casually around another woman, younger, laughing too loudly at something he whispered. They crossed the lot without noticing her, his hand guiding the small of the woman's back the same way it once had guided hers. Lisa froze in the shadows, her breath catching. For a moment she thought he might turn, might recognize her car, might explain. But he didn't look back. He walked her straight through the doors of the same hotel Lisa once slipped into, the same secret corridors now being recycled for someone else. Her phone buzzed in her hand, a notification she couldn't even read. She pressed the screen dark and shoved it into her bag. This was the moment she understood. Not partner, not love, not even priority. She had been a role to fill, and now she'd been replaced. So she pulled her jacket tighter and walked home under the streetlights, each step echoing with that realization. I had just locked up for the night when my phone buzzed. Her name lit the screen. The message was short, almost hesitant. "I want to take the kids to dinner. No cameras, no posts, just dinner." For a long moment I stared at the words, torn between the hope that she meant it and the memory of every time she hadn't. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could have said yes, let her swoop in with takeout bags and shallow smiles, but that wouldn't heal anything. It would only confuse Ethan and Grace more. So I typed carefully, each word measured. "You can see them. But first, you sit down and tell them the truth. No more stories, no distractions, just honesty." I hit send and slid the phone into my pocket. The porch light buzzed overhead, casting my shadow across the driveway. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was chasing her choices. I was setting the terms, not out of spite, but out of protection. The booth smelled of coffee and fried onions, the kind of place where families gathered after church. Ethan and Grace slid in beside me, stiff-backed, their eyes darting toward the door every time it opened. Then Lisa arrived, shoulders hunched, hair pulled into a loose knot. She sat opposite us, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around the laminated menu she didn't read. For a moment, no one spoke. The clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation from other tables felt like a wall between us. Finally, she lifted her eyes to the kids. Her voice was raw, stripped of performance. "I need to say this once," she whispered. "I betrayed your father. I betrayed our family. I made choices I can't take back." Grace's lip trembled. Ethan's jaw locked tight. The silence that followed pressed down harder than any shouting ever could. Lisa didn't rush to explain, didn't plead for sympathy. For once, she let the truth sit there, heavy and undeniable. No excuses, just the words they deserved to hear. We walked out of the diner together, the late evening air colder than it should have been. The neon sign buzzed behind us, casting a flickering glow over the cars. Ethan shoved his hands deep into his pockets, shoulders tight, his eyes fixed on the ground. At the car, he finally spoke, just 4 words, clipped and heavy. "I need some time." Then he opened the back door and slid inside, shutting it firmly without looking back. Grace lingered. She stood in front of Lisa, clutching her pillow like a shield she hadn't brought inside. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, then leaned forward and wrapped her arms around her mother. It wasn't tight, wasn't long, just a brief contact, enough to say, "I hear you," but not enough to heal what was broken. When she pulled away, her eyes were wet, confusion written all over her face. Lisa reached for her again, but Grace shook her head softly and stepped toward me. The ride home was quiet, every one of us tangled in feelings too complicated to untie in one night. The coals hissed as I laid the meat across the grill, the scent of smoke and seasoning rising into the cooling evening air. Ethan sat on the steps, tossing a baseball from hand to hand. Grace was at the picnic table, doodling in her notebook, humming softly the way she always did when she felt safe. I glanced at the other chair by the table, the one Lisa used to claim during every barbecue, beer in hand, laughing too loud at my corny jokes. It sat empty now, catching the last rays of the sun. For a long moment, I don't move the chair. The wind lifts the napkin and drops it into the empty seat. For a second, it looks like a hand waving, and then it's just fabric again. The table was set simply. Pasta, salad, garlic bread still steaming. Ethan twirled noodles with a fork while Grace poured herself water, the ice clinking against the glass. I leaned back, watching them, feeling the hum of an ordinary evening return piece by piece. Trying to lighten the mood, I told one of my famously bad jokes, the kind Lisa used to roll her eyes at. For a moment, there was silence. Ethan staring at me deadpan, Grace blinking like she wasn't sure if she should laugh. Ethan let out the smallest breath that almost sounded like a laugh, then stared at his plate again. Grace smiled, but it faded when her eyes flicked to the empty chair. The room wasn't full of laughter, just the clink of forks and the truth sitting with us like a fourth-place setting. I looked at them both, my chest tightening not with grief this time, but with gratitude. For the first time since it all began, I didn't reach for an answer. We ate in the kind of quiet you learn to live with. Not perfect, not easy, but finally in the right direction. The city slid past my windshield, rows of glowing windows blurring into streaks of yellow and white. Each one hid its own story. Families laughing, couples fighting, someone sitting alone in silence. For a long time, I thought my story had ended the night Lisa walked out. But endings and beginnings share the same door. Forgiveness doesn't demand an immediate answer. It doesn't erase what was done. It waits, patient, until peace takes root inside you. I don't ask if she'll change. I don't ask if I will. The light turns green. I don't move right away. Cars stack up behind me, and for a beat, I just watch the signal blink, like a promise I'm not ready to make.